Let's cross over to Mark Meirowitz, who's a professor at the State University of New York Maritime College and a foreign policy analyst. He joins us now live from New York. Mark, when we look at the Iranian retaliation here, what does all of this amount to?
Well, I mean, it's a chess game, and look, the United States killed Soleimani, and Iran said they would retaliate, so they retaliated. So chess game, move, and then counter move. The question is what happens next. So far, the attack by Iran, as has been reported by you and your reporters, no U.S. casualties so far, as far as we know. This was not, a major retaliation. It sends a message, and now the president, closes shop for the night, and hopefully there's nothing further. The question is, what is next? And the question is, what will the United States do, or what will Iran do? That's somewhat imponderable. But I would say this. I would say that I don't believe, although, again, we're dealing with Iran, so that is quite unpredictable. I think Iran wanted to make the point that it could retaliate. It wants to make the point to send a message that, as the Iranians are saying, that, and I think Zarif said this, that, the United States does not belong in Iraq. They should get out of Iraq. That's their message. And I think that's their end game, is to get the United States out of Iraq. As far as Trump's policy, Trump is mercurial, but Trump is unpredictable. And that can be very, very confusing to adversaries. We know this with Nixon in Vietnam, and the same thing with Trump. The adversary is confused because they don't know whether or not Trump is going to over-retaliate. And I believe that has suppressed their intention to overact and overreact on this, because they really don't know. Remember Trump said to Kim Jong-un, "My button is bigger than your button." I mean, who knows what that means? That's an unpredictability that I don't think the Iranian adversary wants to take a chance. Now, about the history here, the history between the U.S. and Iran is very, very difficult, very fraught. It goes back to the hostage crisis, and it comes into the period of the nuclear deal, and then Trump pulling out of the nuclear deal. So the relationship is very, very difficult. Nevertheless, through that period, I believe Trump said a number of times that he was intending to try to work a deal with Iran. He's the deal maker, right? So I think at the end of the day, each side has basically, again, I'm not trying to minimize the killing or the casualties or anything like that, but this is a game where moves are being made in foreign policy, and the question is who is going to, kind of a game of chicken, who's going to overreact first. I think that's really what's going to happen here. And I, by the way, don't believe that Iran has the capacity. Yes, I guess if they want to unleash a war and come truth with all these claims that they're making, but I think the retaliation that they would face from the United States would be catastrophic for them. I don't believe they would do it. I don't think so. But again, it's the Middle East.
I hope you're right, Mark.
So I hope
you're right. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is also threatening U.S. allies in all this after Tehran said it carried out this nighttime missile strike against the U.S. And they've also brought Israel into this. They've also said Israel's an ally of the United States. Doesn't matter whether they took part in the strike or not, but they're also threatening Israel in all of this.
No, we've been there before with Saddam Hussein shooting missiles at Israel. I mean, there's kind of a triangular thing where, the United States kills Soleimani, and then, of course, Iran has to attack Israel. I mean, there's a very bizarre, logic to that. But I think that at the end of the day, when you talk about the allies, look, the Iranians basically, the United States came out of the nuclear deal, but the Iranians and the United States places sanctions on countries, Europeans, that do business with Iran. So I don't think Iran will want to further alienate any Europeans or any allies of the United States any further, because they're going to put themselves in a corner and they're not going to be able to get out of it. They're already hurting from the sanctions very severely. So I think that any move that they made the point that they retaliated. They made the point, they made the message. I think their immediate short-range game is to get the United States out of Iraq. But I think the parliament, if you see in the Iraqi parliament, yes, took an action which was not definitive, And the Sunnis and the Kurds were not present for that action, and that wasn't really a binding action. So they didn't achieve what I believe is the objective is to get the United States out of Iraq. On the contrary, what they'll precipitate by doing this might be the opposite, where Trump might actually escalate, and he's sending more troops. So I think that point one, they don't want to alienate further the Europeans and other countries that they want to do business with in order to survive. And secondly, they don't want to overreact in order to have the situation reversed. And the United States doesn't leave Iraq. It actually escalates its involvement in Iraq. So there are a lot of pressure points here. They've made their point, and now and hopefully there isn't more coming. If there's more coming, then it becomes a cycle, a vicious cycle, and where that ends up, we really don't know. Hopefully, it doesn't continue, and it doesn't continue to escalate. But it's possible that they will unleash what you just said, a further attack on Israel, or continue attacking U.S. assets. It's totally unpredictable. I don't believe it. I also don't believe that they have the capacity. Again, I'm not knowledgeable of their ability, but I think, as I understand it, I don't think they have the capacity with the sanctions to really have the staying power against the United States and its allies and its assets to be able to have the staying power to maintain a long-term battle against the United States and its allies. I don't see it. And remember, it's not just the United States in the Middle East that's opposed to Iran. It's also the Saudis and other elements in the Middle East who are opposed to Iranian expansion. And furthermore, there's the whole issue in Syria. So, yes, this is a boiling kettle, and hopefully it doesn't, boil over. But I think that the Iranians want to make a point, make the message, show their mourning and all the things that they're showing, and then, hopefully they can move on. If they can't move on, they could end up precipitating a disaster for themselves. I mean, again, that will have to be their consideration, I think, if they're pragmatic. If they're not pragmatic, then it's hard to ponder what could occur. We could have a cycle, just as you described. It's possible.
Mark, in terms of countries, President Trump said earlier that there were other countries that supported him in this decision. Who is supporting the U.S. action right now when it comes to Iran? And particularly the fact that if indeed this does escalate, you have NATO repositioning and moving some of its forces out of Iraq. You've got Canada. I believe Germany is also added to that list. Where's the international community on this?
Well, I think this is an interesting point because we know that the Trump doctrine and Trump's foreign policy is not interested in multilateral agreements or alliances. We know that Trump has criticized NATO. He believes that NATO members should pay more money. He doesn't like multilateral agreements. He's pulled out of every multilateral agreement that has been entered into. So I think on this one, he's not going for an alliance or support with allies like the NATO allies, but in the Middle East, I think he has the support of the Saudis and others who are fearful of Iran's expansion. I think you have to go back to some extent to Pompeo's speech to the Heritage Foundation, in which the United States said its position was that, Iran we want Iran, says Pompeo, to come into the civil, into the national, be a nation like every other nation, but they have to do a couple of things. And he listed 12 items, including stop their ballistic missile program, obviously not go nuclear, get out of Syria, all of these things. And Iran didn't do any of them. And again, what we're seeing here, whether Trump's step was right or wrong, it really points out very clearly all of the points that Pompeo made, because, look, I mean, they're launching missiles from Iran into Iraq. And that's not in Iranian space, it's in Iraq. It shows their ability to surround the American embassy in Iraq, shows their influence. In Syria, they are influential. Throughout the Middle East, the Iranians, in Lebanon, Hezbollah is influential. This heightens, I believe, focus on Iranian expansion and their attempted hegemony. And I don't think that the regional powers are in favor of that. So the question is, will the United States get a lot of support? I think in the past, as we've seen in American foreign policy, in many cases, America's out there in the vanguard and doing things. Now, whether that's the right thing or the wrong thing, as in the Iraq War, for example, is debatable. Now we're sitting here right at the threshold of events that we cannot predict which way, which road it's going to go down. But again, I believe that Iran will calculate that they cannot succeed in the long term by launching all-out attacks in all these directions. I don't think they have the capacity to do it because they would face retaliation. And they're already hurting on the sanctions. Their economy is in tatters. Their people are suffering. So they're going to have more suffering, more protests on the streets. I don't think they're going to do it. They wanted to make the point, we can retaliate against the United States. They did. No U.S. casualties. If that's the case, then that's really, thank God, that's very good. And then, and then we have to see where we go. And maybe the direction that we go, as strange as politics is, maybe it goes in the direction that that the U.S. can work a deal with Iran and bring it back into the nuclear deal and bring it back into some sort of agreement, just like Trump did with North Korea. Is it possible? Anything's possible. We saw Trump at the DMZ with Kim Jong-un. So maybe we could see Trump meeting with the Iranians. It's possible. Each part made its point,
right, Mark,
and now the question
really
is which way we go. And that's imponderable.
Absolutely.
My pleasure.
Well, I am